Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where a viewer recently said that I need some new expressions. How is this? Our series examining the worst and least known events in each state continues, this time exploring the terrible past of Mississippi. Some people claim it is the worst state of them all, but when it comes to spreading death and misery, is it really number one? Let's start with a massacre that took place at a courthouse. Carroll County Courthouse Massacre. When slavery ended in Mississippi, racism did not. And sometimes the prejudice of the state's white population could erupt into sudden and terrifying violence. Ed and Charley Brown were brothers. They were half Native American and half black. In January 1886, the siblings were trying to earn a living by delivering molasses to a nearby saloon. While trying to transport it, Ed and Charley accidentally spilled some on a white man named Robert Moore. Robert had words with the brothers, but the matter seemed to be resolved. A month later, Robert told the story to a friend of his named James Liddell. James was an attorney and a newspaper editor, and he thought the event deserved more attention. On February 12, 1886, James Liddell decided to confront Ed and Charley about the molasses incident. He claimed the brothers spilled it on purpose. As the confrontation started to become violent, bystanders jumped in and broke up the argument. But later that evening, James Liddell decided to confront the brothers again. This time, the argument resulted in gunshots being fired. All three men were injured, but not seriously. Ed and Charley decided to charge James with attempted murder. The white people of Carrollton County responded with anger. They did not appreciate black men using a court of law to seek justice. The trial for the charges against James Liddell took place on March 17, 1886. Before lawyers could make their arguments, 50 armed white men stormed into the courtroom. They began shooting at Ed and Charley as well as any other minorities they could find in attendance. Some of the black people in the courtroom tried to escape by jumping from the second-floor windows. Armed white men were waiting outside to shoot them as they tried to run away. Ed and Charley were killed, but the total number of victims is unknown. The governor of Mississippi, Robert Lowry, blamed black people for bringing violence upon themselves. However, the rest of the United States was horrified and demanded justice. Nobody was ever held accountable for the massacre, but not everybody in Mississippi was supportive of it. An article in the Jackson Clarion said, "To such considerations we can close our eyes and our ears, but we cannot be blind or deaf to the appeals of the weak who claim and deserve our protection, nor can we be unmindful of the indelible blot that has been put upon the reputation of the state." Casey Jones. Sometimes it is possible to be both a hero and a villain. Casey Jones was born in Case, Kentucky on March 14, 1863. As an adult, he moved to Jackson, Tennessee, where he met his future wife, Mary. Casey converted to Catholicism, then married her on November 25, 1886. He also started working for the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. Casey became very skilled with trains. He started by working with the brakes. Then he became responsible for keeping the engine running. In 1887, a yellow fever epidemic spread throughout the South. The Illinois Central Railroad lost several employees to the disease. Casey switched to that railroad, and by 1891 he was finally promoted to engineer. He became responsible for a freight route that traveled from Jackson, Tennessee to Water Valley, Mississippi. Casey Jones was well known by those who lived along the route because he had a special train whistle. It supposedly sounded like a Viking war cry. In 1895, as his train was approaching Michigan City, Mississippi, Casey saw a young girl standing on the tracks. He yelled at her to move, but she was frozen in place, so he leaned over the side of the train car and grabbed the girl off the tracks before she was killed. Casey could have died trying to save her, so he was considered a hero for risking his life to save the young child. In February 1900, Casey Jones was transferred to a new route. Thanks to the latest promotion, he was responsible for driving a passenger train from Memphis, Tennessee to Canton, Mississippi. On the evening of April 29th, Casey began his usual route. However, he was behind schedule, so he increased speed to try and make up for lost time. As his train arrived in Durant, Casey was told to travel south to the town of Vaughn. He did as asked and started moving his train in that direction. Still trying to make up for being late, he increased his speed again, reaching 80 miles an hour. What Casey did not know was that 3 trains were stopped on the tracks at Vaughn. As he began to approach the train station, he finally saw the red lights on the stopped trains. Rather than jump to safety, Casey Jones stayed on this train. He pulled the whistle and continued hitting the brakes until the moment of impact. Thanks to Casey's actions, he was the only fatality in the train collision. A passenger who was asleep on Casey's train had good things to say about the deceased engineer. The passengers did not suffer, and there was no panic. I was jarred a little in my bunk, but when fairly awake, the train was stopped and everything was still. Engineer Jones did a wonderful as well as a heroic piece of work at the cost of his life. The marvel and mystery is how Engineer Jones stopped that train. The railroadmen themselves wondered at it, and of course the uninitiated could not do less. But stop it he did, in a way that showed his complete mastery of his engine, as well as his sublime heroism. I imagine that the Vaughn wreck will be talked about in roundhouses, lunchrooms, and cabooses for the next 6 months, not alone on the Illinois Central, but many other roads in Mississippi and Louisiana. The Natchez Dance Hall Holocaust. A small wood frame building in Natchez began its life as a blacksmith shop. Several years later, it became a church. By 1940, the building was used to host entertainment events. Most notably, jazz orchestras frequently performed there. On April 23rd, a band from Chicago came to play. Walter Barnes and his Royal Creolians were the main attraction. Young men from all over Natchez purchased tickets to watch them perform. As spectators entered the building, they were treated to decorations which marked the special event. Most notably, Spanish moss was draped over the rafters in the roof, and to make sure that the moss wasn't full of insects, it was sprayed with a petroleum-based insecticide. As the band started to play that night, the club was packed. At one point, 746 people were crammed into the small building. Around 11 p.m., a fire started, and the moss burst into flames. In addition to the fact that Spanish moss is flammable, the insecticide was also extremely combustible. As a result, the fire grew very quickly. The city of Natchez didn't have a fire department, but nearby volunteers arrived within 10 minutes to help fight the flames. As they fought the growing fire, the screams of burning victims could be heard throughout downtown Natchez. People tried desperately to get out of the building. However, most of the windows were sealed to prevent outsiders from being able to watch the band play. Also, the doors of the building opened inward, so as people pushed towards the exit, nobody could pull the doors open. Hundreds of people were trapped in the flames. It took about 30 agonizing minutes to finally extinguish the fire. Bystanders and firefighters rushed in and began rescuing victims as quickly as possible. The next day, it was determined that 209 people died in the accident. Hundreds more were severely injured. Some of the dead were so badly burned the bodies couldn't be identified. The unidentified corpses were buried in a mass grave. The cause of the fire was never found. Authorities believed that someone probably threw away a lit cigarette, which ignited the Spanish moss. Before this accident, there were no laws in Mississippi regulating building safety. Thanks to the disaster, laws were passed to place limits on building occupancy. Additionally, doors were required to open outward. Ole Miss Riot of 1962. In 1954, the United States Supreme Court ruled that segregation in public schools was illegal. But 8 years after the decision, every school in Mississippi remained segregated. President Kennedy swore to fix this when he took office in 1961. Kennedy couldn't directly challenge racist attitudes in the South. That job belonged to James Meredith. James was born in Kosciuszko on June 25, 1933. After serving in the United States Air Force, then attending Jackson State University, he decided to enroll at the University of Mississippi. To try and stop this from happening, the Mississippi State Legislature passed a law which prevented anyone charged with moral turpitude from attending the University of Mississippi. Then James Meredith was charged and jailed for mistakenly writing an incorrect date on a form. After being released, he planned to sign up for classes despite the criminal accusation. Governor Ross Barnett kept interfering with attempts by James to enroll at the university. On September 28th, Governor Barnett was found in contempt of court and was threatened with arrest by federal authorities. He finally stopped interfering and allowed the enrollment process to move forward. On September 30th, James was flown to Oxford. 24 federal marshals then escorted him to his dormitory. Next, the federal agents converted the university's administration building into their personal headquarters. Within an hour of James Meredith arriving, riots started outside the dormitory building. The mob was encouraged, at least in part, by the words of Edwin Walker. Walker had been a major general in the United States Army. He had served in World War II and the Korean War, but he was also extremely racist and promoted this ideology while in uniform. When President Eisenhower admonished him, Edwin tried to resign. The resignation was refused. Under President Kennedy, Edwin finally succeeded in resigning his commission. In 1961, he moved to Texas and tried to start a political career by running for governor. The night before James Meredith arrived at the University of Mississippi, Walker appeared on television saying, "This is Edwin A. Walker. I am in Mississippi beside Governor Ross Barnett. I call for a national protest against the conspiracy from within. Rally to the cause of freedom in righteous indignation, violent vocal protest, and bitter silence under the flag of Mississippi at the use of federal troops. This today is a disgrace to the nation in dire peril, a disgrace beyond the capacity of anyone except its enemies. This is the conspiracy of the crucifixion by Antichrist conspirators of the Supreme Court in their denial of prayer and their betrayal of a nation." At first, Mississippi Highway Patrol helped provide security. But as the crowds grew larger and angrier, the state police retreated. The only thing that stood between James Meredith and being lynched were several federal agents. Governor Ross Barnett spoke on the radio around 11 p.m. that night. Federal authorities hoped he might help defuse the situation, but instead he agitated the mob by saying, "We will never surrender." As the night progressed, rioters began taking shots at reporters and federal agents. They also stole bulldozers and tried to drive them over the marshals. As the violence continued to escalate, the crowd grew until nearly 3,000 people were present. President Kennedy felt he was out of options. He invoked the Insurrection Act of 1807, which allowed the president to deploy the military for the purpose of suppressing civil disorder. Kennedy then ordered Major General Charles Billingsley to take his troops and fix the situation. When Billingsley arrived on campus, a mob attacked his car and set it on fire. The general and his aides dragged themselves from the burning car and ran for cover as rioters took shots at them. The riot finally ended after 15 hours when 25,000 troops arrived on campus. They began clearing the rioters and started treating the wounded. Edwin Walker was also arrested and charged with insurrection. In the aftermath of the riot, it was discovered that 2 civilians were executed that night. One was French journalist Paul Girard, and the other was a jukebox repairman. 166 federal agents were injured in the riot, and 40 soldiers were wounded. Despite being assaulted, federal agents and National Guard troops did not return fire. The violence did not change James Meredith's mind. He enrolled for classes on October 1st. Although he endured years of harassment, he graduated with a degree in political science on August 18, 1963. Attorney General Robert Kennedy wanted to punish Edwin Walker for inciting the riot. He ordered a 90-day psychiatric evaluation and had the former general committed to a mental asylum. The American Civil Liberties Union and several well-known psychiatrists protested the use of mental health services for political retaliation. Walker was released after being held for only 3 days. Pascagoula UFO Abduction. Although Mississippi has had an unfortunate history of violence, it was also home to the most well-documented UFO abduction event to date. On October 11, 1973, Calvin Parker was 19 years old and worked at a shipyard. His foreman was Charles Hickson, who was 42 years old. The two men were fishing together from the bank of the Pascagoula River, as they had done many times before. As the sun went down, supposedly aliens arrived and took them. Charles told the Washington Post how it happened. "I was just getting ready to get some more bait when I heard a kind of zipping sound. I looked up and saw a blue flashing light. Calvin turned around too. We saw a 30-foot-long object with a little dome on top. As it hovered just above the ground, 3 small creatures emerged, also hovering." Calvin and Charles said that they floated inside the spacecraft. The men were subjected to a physical examination. When it was finished, they were returned to their fishing spot. Calvin and Charles ran to the nearby police station, excitedly telling their story. Investigators thought the men must be drunk or were trying to perpetuate a hoax, so they left them alone in a room together and recorded the conversation. Calvin and Charles talked about what they had seen, but never gave any indication that it was fake. The event soon became national news. Charles Hickson went on television shows such as Johnny Carson and Dick Cavett. He also published a book in 1983. Calvin Parker was young and didn't enjoy the attention, so he stayed out of the spotlight. However, Calvin eventually changed his mind. He published his own book in 2018 called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story. Journalists and skeptics who investigated the story doubt the claims are true. Charles passed away in 2011. But Calvin Parker is still alive, and he claims the abduction really happened. In this episode, we have only scratched the surface of the terrible things that have happened in Mississippi. But if you want to learn more about this state's history, we have covered some of it in previous episodes. In Bad Things Happened in 1955, we describe what happened to Emmett Till. Spoiler alert, he was killed and nobody was punished. If you just want to be disgusted, we have covered a murderer from Mississippi who ate one of his victims. That episode is called Killer Cannibals. And in the early 20th century, a woman from Mississippi stole hundreds of children and sold them to wealthy families. If you want to learn about that depressing story, then please watch The Child Thief. If you found this episode interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more episodes like this in the future. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.